Tonight at 10, COVID restrictions are likely to be reimposed in England if progress in giving booster vaccinations is not satisfactory. As the UK reports one of the highest weekly figures of new infections anywhere in the world, ministers say the booster is essential.
We've been in a race between the vaccine and the virus. And although we're ahead in that race, the gap is narrowing.
Raises the prospect of the reintroduction of mandatory face coverings and working from home, as health experts warn it is a critical time.
This is the lesson we must learn from the past, to prepare for what looks like an inevitable, challenging period, rather than to cross our fingers and stumble into a crisis.
We'll have more details as ministers warn that the number of new infections could rise to 100,000 a day. Also tonight, more women are being spiked by needles in nightclubs. Police are told to investigate the problem. We'll be talking to one of the victims. The Queen, who's had a very busy fortnight, is said to have reluctantly cancelled a visit to Northern Ireland on medical advice. In Brazil, President Bolsonaro is accused of crimes against humanity for his widely criticised handling of the pandemic. Good evening. COVID restrictions are likely to be reimposed in England if progress in giving people their booster vaccinations is not thought to be satisfactory. That's the warning from the Health Secretary Sajid Javid, who said that the number of new infections could rise to 100,000 a day, raising the prospect of another phase of mandatory face coverings, working from home and the use of vaccine passports in some crowded settings. The 7-day average of new cases in the UK stands at 45,799. That is one of the highest figures of its kind in the world, although the number of deaths is well below the winter peak. Our health editor Hugh Pym has the latest.
Queues of ambulances waiting to hand over patients at some hospitals tell their own story. The NHS under intensifying pressure, coping with a range of health conditions, and all that before winter has started to bite. And today the Health Secretary struck a more downbeat note with a warning about the outlook for COVID cases.
They could go yet as high as 100,000 a day. We're also seeing greater pressure on the NHS. Across the UK, we're now approaching 1,000 hospitalisations per day.
Health leaders say with those COVID numbers adding to the existing strain on hospitals, intervention is needed now in the shape of the government's Plan B, setting out tougher measures which could be implemented.
When you have the combination of winter pressures, COVID pressures and the backlog, put all of that together, you've got a perfect storm, and that's why we need to do everything we can to reduce the pressure, and that's why we need Plan B now.
The government says it'll introduce Plan B if there's unsustainable pressure on the NHS in England, with steps like making face coverings mandatory in some settings, asking people to work from home and introducing vaccine passports. In Northern Ireland, face coverings remain a legal requirement in crowded indoor spaces. It's the same for masks in Wales. Proof of vaccination at nightclubs is needed and people are encouraged to work from home. Scotland's strategy similarly includes vaccine passports and face masks in schools and some other settings. Ministers say the strategy in England for now is to focus on the continued rollout of vaccines, booster jabs and first and second doses for those who haven't already had them. But the big unknown is whether that can happen fast enough to help slow any future spread of the virus. Here, Gareth is getting a third dose. He's eligible because he's undergoing treatment for cancer and his immune system has been compromised.
I feel great, actually. I feel a lot more confident going forward. I'm a great believer in the vaccination programme.
The public to come forward for jabs.
Sajid Javid ruled out Plan B for now, but he warned that if people didn't come forward for jabs, the government might have to step in.
Am I saying that if we don't do our bit, get vaccinated, all those behavioural changes that we can make, that we are more likely to face restrictions as we head into winter? Then I am saying that. I think we've been really clear that we've all got a role to play.
He also announced deals to secure 2 new treatments for COVID patients, which would be available for the NHS if approved by regulators. But that could be a few months away. In the meantime, the virus threat is still looming. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
So let's confirm those latest official figures for the UK. The number of new infections in the past week was up 17% compared to the previous week. There were 49,139 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. It means there were 45,799 cases on average per day in the past week, and the number of people in hospital with COVID is slowly rising. It's now 7,891. There were another 179 deaths recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average, there were 136 deaths per day in the past week. Now, we've been talking in the main about the situation in England so far, but there are some significant variations when we look at Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So let's take the temperature then with our colleagues Emma Vardy in Stormont and Sarah Smith in Glasgow. We'll start with Mark Hutchings in Cardiff.
Well, very challenging are the words that the Welsh Government are using to describe the months that lie ahead. Actually, if you roll back, then Welsh case rates were the lowest of the UK nations in the first part of the year. More recently, they've been the highest. As for talk of a Plan B elsewhere, ministers here say, well, that's already part of their current Plan A, because face coverings remain compulsory in many settings, albeit with rather mixed public response. COVID passes are now required in places like nightclubs, and the message remains work from home if you can. I'm told it's not thought there are any increases in restrictions looming, but we'll know more at next week's government review.
Cases here in Northern Ireland rose as children went back to school, but have since declined, although they remained steadily higher than some of the lower numbers we'd previously begun to see during lockdowns. Now, ministers have warned people that the wearing of masks is going to continue being a legal requirement in Northern Ireland in busy indoor spaces through the winter months, and that they may decide to bring back some restrictions if pressures on the health service become too much. Now, restaurants and bars here still can't be full to capacity, Northern Ireland being the last part of the UK to keep restrictions on these, but those are due to be relaxed at the end of this month on October the 31st.
COVID cases have been falling in Scotland, but the government cautioned they are still higher than we'd like. Infections peaked in early September, and there has been a rapid decline since then. That sharp fall took experts by surprise. The difference between Scotland and some other parts of the UK could be because schools here went back about 3 weeks earlier, so there was an earlier surge associated with kids mixing in classrooms. Face masks will continue to be worn in schools, and they're mandatory in other indoor settings. You need proof of double vaccination to get into nightclubs or other large events like football matches. And there's controversy here today over a delay to vaccine booster jabs, which won't be available to many until mid-November.
That was Sarah Smith there for us in Glasgow. Morocco has banned flights to and from the UK because of the pandemic. Several UK airlines and holiday companies have been told by the Moroccan government that flights will be suspended from midnight tonight until further notice. Flights between Morocco and Germany and the Netherlands have also been suspended. So let's tie up the loose ends, if you like, with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg at Westminster. Laura, are you detecting any signs within government that they think that the likelihood of new restrictions is now more of a possibility than it was before?
Well, Hugh, there's no question that the government is very, very reluctant to start reimposing limits on all our lives. There's no question that they would almost rather anything else happen but that. But I think we did hear a change in tone from the Health Secretary today. Let's just think for a second about what he said. He urged people to go and have their vaccine if they still haven't. He absolutely urged people to make sure that they go and get their booster when they are called for that. And he also urged all of us to think again about how we live our lives. Maybe going to meet people outside, making sure we make use of lateral flow tests, maybe thinking again about putting on masks in crowded spaces. And I think that that is really representation of a different tone in government. More caution is the message that they want to convey to the public, in a sense reminding everybody, do your bit, or else the government might find themselves in a situation where they do have to, one by one, start reimposing limits. Now, let's remember what is actually a possibility if the government triggers its Plan B. Plan B, reintroducing face masks, reintroducing some limits, is a million miles away from going back to some kind of lockdown. But there is no question that we would have heard the kind of thing from what the Health Secretary said today if there weren't, at the very least, some nerves and trepidations in government about what the next few months might hold.
Laura, once again, many thanks. Laura Kuenssberg there for us at Westminster. Police forces have been asked to look urgently into the problem of women being spiked by needles in nightclubs. More than 100,000 people have signed a petition calling for compulsory searches at nightclubs after a number of reported spikings by needle. And groups from more than 30 universities around the UK have joined an online campaign calling for the boycott of nightclubs. Cases have been reported in Nottingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, among other places, as our correspondent Joe Black reports.
After COVID, it was supposed to be the Freshers' Week they never had. But on this night out at a club in Nottingham, second-year university student Sarah Buckle became so unwell she ended up in hospital.
Out of nowhere, I seemed to just stop communicating. I couldn't talk. It was as if suddenly someone just turned a switch.
The 19-year-old believes she was the victim of an injection spiking.
I was almost screaming out for help and then almost going unconscious and coming back round and choking, and they could just tell immediately, wait, it's not that she's had too much to drink, something's really, really wrong. I have no memory of anything. I think my earliest memory would have been around 9 a.m. My hand was throbbing and a bruise was starting to develop.
Posts on social media talk of similar incidents, and now a petition calling for compulsory searches at nightclubs has been signed by more than 130,000 people. And groups from more than 30 universities around the UK have joined a campaign calling for a boycott of nightclubs at the end of this month. The problem of people having their drink spiked in nighttime venues has been reported for many years. But now there are new fears about the rise of injection spiking. However, only a small number of police forces across the UK say they've had reports of this happening. Despite this, young people we spoke to today in Nottingham said they were worried.
I won't go out. I won't. It's too worrying.
You shouldn't have in the back of your thought, is someone going to stab me with a needle and spike my drink or anything like that. So, yeah, it's really concerning.
It's one thing to worry about your drink being spiked, but having stuff injected into you that you don't know what it is, anything can happen to you. It's terrifying.
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has now asked police forces for an urgent update on this issue. And today at the Home Affairs Select Committee, questions about the scale of the problem.
Do you think police forces are taking this seriously enough?
Every Chief Constable takes this as top priority, violence against women in general.
Sarah says it will be a long time before she can enjoy another night out, but she hopes her story will be a warning to others.
If you feel unwell slightly or just think you've had a bit too much to drink, go home, and if you think something more sinister might have happened, do not be afraid to contact the police.
Joe Black, BBC News, Nottingham.
Inflation, that's the rate at which prices are rising, fell to 3.1% in the year to September, according to the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics. That is down from 3.2% in August. And the fall has been linked to last summer's Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which meant prices in restaurants and cafes rose at a slower rate this summer than last. And today's figure is still way above the Bank of England's target rate of 2%. And economists expect the rate to rise again. The bank has warned that it will have to act over rising inflation. And that is a suggestion that interest rates could be rising sometime soon. The Queen has cancelled a trip to Northern Ireland and has reluctantly accepted medical advice to rest for the next few days, according to Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty, who celebrated her 95th birthday in April, will stay at Windsor Castle, but is still expected to attend the Global Climate Change Conference in Glasgow later this month. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has more details.
The Queen at Windsor Castle last night, hosting a reception for global business and other leaders, doing what she's done for nearly 70 years now, representing and gently canvassing support for Britain. She was, by all accounts, in good spirits. It was the latest in a series of engagements over the past 8 days. She was at Westminster Abbey last Tuesday, using a walking stick for the first time at a public engagement. 2 days later, she was in Cardiff for the opening of the Welsh Parliament. At every engagement, there are lines of guests, all of them anxious to meet her and have a few moments of conversation. In addition, there's the daily business of monarchy, audiences, many of them now by video call.
Ah, there you are.
This was earlier this week, the Queen in Windsor speaking via cyberspace to the new Governor-General of New Zealand.
Good morning, Kieran. Oh, of course, it's good. It's good morning, isn't it, to you? Yes.
This afternoon, this 95-year-old monarch should have been boarding a flight to Northern Ireland for a series of engagements there tonight and tomorrow. But this morning, Buckingham Palace issued this short statement. The Queen has reluctantly accepted medical advice to rest for the next few days. Her Majesty is in good spirits and is disappointed that she will no longer be able to visit Northern Ireland. The Queen is not unwell, but she is 95, and there's obviously a need for anyone at that age to pace themselves sensibly. And that's all officials insist that's happening here. There are, it's understood, no COVID-related concerns. The Queen has, of course, received her double vaccination. What royal officials and doctors will be focused on is her role at the forthcoming COP26 summit, when the Queen will be hosting all the visiting leaders. They will want to be sure that she is fully rested for that. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The Financial Services Regulator, the FCA, is to be investigated over its role in the British Steel pension scandal. Thousands of workers lost money when they were advised to transfer out of the pension scheme in 2017, and some say that they have been failed again by the authorities. Our Wales correspondent Howard Griffith has more details.
It's a cloud that hangs over Britain's steel industry. Thousands of its workers who were saving for their future had their pensions preyed upon by a few financial advisors looking for a quick profit.
We all earn the same amount of money, and they all had £85,000 and I had zero. How was that fair?
Richie Pugh from Port Talbot is one of nearly 8,000 workers who followed the advice to cash in his pension and invest, a decision which now means he may have to work longer. He's received no compensation.
It's a long, long battle, and it shouldn't be so difficult to get fairness for all steel workers. It's a lottery, and who gets what. I mean, my pension's dropped £20,000 in the last 2 weeks because of the markets. That's not right. You know, there's no stability for myself, and that's the same for everybody else.
Workers like Richie were told to transfer out of their pension in 2017 after being warned it could fail. Many took bad advice and depended on a regulator being there to protect them. That regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, is now being investigated to see whether it acted properly and has done enough since to support the workers.
It means that we are no longer banging on the door of the regulator and the compensators. It means that somebody else is of equal standing. For many steel workers, this will or should mean there's light at the end of the tunnel.
What happened in the steel industry was one of Britain's worst ever mis-selling scandals. But it only really came to light because so many of the workers were all in one place and realised together something had gone wrong. The fear is that other people in other industries may still be vulnerable to a few unscrupulous advisors when it comes to trying to secure their future.
The FCA says it's already changed the rules on advice over pension transfers and will work with the National Audit Office's investigation. The findings are due in the spring. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Port Talbot.
In Brazil, a parliamentary inquiry has published its findings into President Bolsonaro's highly controversial handling of the pandemic there. The country's death toll from COVID, at more than 600,000, is the second highest in the world after the United States. And the president finds himself accused of crimes against humanity and misuse of public funds. Our South America correspondent, Katie Watson, has the story.
O vírus chegou e brevemente passará. Devemos, sim, voltar à normalidade.
But despite President Bolsonaro's bold predictions, COVID-19 wreaked havoc in Brazil. There's no normal for the hundreds of thousands of families who lost loved ones. And as each new grave was dug, denial at the top continued. Today was the culmination of nearly 6 months of hearings, picking apart all that Bolsonaro did and didn't do. The government was accused of underplaying the crisis from the very start.
BBC News.
Senators pointing to our report in the Amazon, where hospitals collapsed earlier this year, as proof the situation was worse than claimed. Ahead of the report's final reading, crimes including indigenous genocide and mass homicide were removed. That, though, doesn't mean Bolsonaro has been let off.
Absolutely not. The combined charges against President Bolsonaro amount to more than 84 years in prison.
Tadeu spent 4 months in ICU. The scars from being intubated still very visible. His family refused to believe the doctors when they said his only option was palliative care. Thanks to them, Tadeu's here today. Families were betrayed, Tadeu says. They feel a weight on their conscience that they could have done something like my family did. There was an ideological choice made, not a medical one, with my treatment. The inquiry has its critics. Bolsonaro's supporters say it's vindictive, and he remains resolute.
Nada produziram, a não ser o ódio e o rancor entre alguns de nós. Mas nós sabemos que não temos culpa de absolutamente nada. Sabemos que fizemos a coisa certa desde o primeiro momento.
600,000 deaths and counting. While Brazil buries the dead, crimes are still being unearthed. But will Jair Bolsonaro have to answer to them?
So senators will be back here next week to vote on the report, and if it passes, it will go to federal prosecutors who will decide whether or not to look into the charges recommended by the report. But there are no guarantees. What is clear, though, is that this inquiry has dented Bolsonaro's popularity, and there are elections here in Brazil next year. So could this cost him re-election if he runs?
Katie, many thanks again. Katie Watson with the latest in Brazil. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has confirmed the official terror threat level facing MPs has been raised from moderate to substantial in the wake of the killing of Sir David Amess. Speaking in the House of Commons, she said the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre has conducted an independent review on the risks facing MPs after Sir David was stabbed to death in his Essex constituency last Friday. Hyperemesis gravidarum is a relatively rare condition, but it has a debilitating effect on women in pregnancy. It causes extreme nausea and sickness, making it very difficult to digest food and fluid. And for some, it can last their entire pregnancy. A new study of 5,000 women has found that more than half considered having an abortion because their symptoms from the condition were so bad. Our correspondent Daniela Ralph has more details.
I vomited anything from 10 to 30 times a day, at least, for 259 days.
I couldn't keep anything down. I used to vomit just from my spit alone.
I lost 3 stone with my first pregnancy and 4 stone with my most recent pregnancy, which was also in lockdown.
Extreme pregnancy sickness can overwhelm you. These women let us listen in to their online support group. For Laura and her unborn baby boy, both their lives were at risk. She terminated her pregnancy.
Either both of us going or, unfortunately him. And with 2 other kids at home, that the decision was that I couldn't leave them without a mum.
I also considered termination. I had really bad anxiety and depression.
I met with a consultant who told me I needed to eat more. She asked me if I had an eating disorder because I was so tiny, my baby was struggling to grow properly.
The new research, based on testimony the BBC helped to collect, shows the impact of extreme pregnancy sickness. 68% of women said they were bedridden most of the time and needed extra support every day. More than half had considered a termination during their pregnancy. And just over a quarter of women felt so unwell they contemplated suicide.
Devastating for these women who are having to come into hospital so many times.
We showed one of the report's authors what women who'd had HG told us.
I had 60 admissions into hospital over the course of 9 months.
Women are really suffering, and we actually know that there's increasing amounts of evidence now that the medications that we use for hyperemesis are safe. And there's increasing amount of evidence for that. We need to share it with the patients to empower them to look for more help, but we also need to share it with healthcare professionals, both in primary and secondary care, so that they can feel empowered to provide these treatments.
2 years ago, Laura Anderson kept a video diary of her traumatic pregnancy.
I still can't eat and I can't drink. And I'm hungry.
She now has daughter Ava, but is forever changed.
Do you think you'll have any more children?
No. If I could be promised that I wouldn't have HG, I would definitely have another baby. I can't be a mum if I've got HG.
Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Let's have a quick look at tonight's football. Both Manchester United and Chelsea were back in action in the Champions League, and Joe Wilson was watching.
Turns and twists could only be complete with a Ronaldo leap.
Into Ronaldo!
Old Trafford shook with the rhythm of revival. Genius, isn't he?
Pushing the accelerator.
Meanwhile, Chelsea were in control in West London. Kai Havertz here, 4-0 final score against Malmo. Lukaku and Werner limped off, but this result, no dramas. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
And that's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.